I've always wanted to construct and furnish a Victorian era dollhouse down to the most pedantic of details, keeping true to the materials, methods, and designs of the period. While this is an ambitious dream project, it is really my lack of living space and a proper workshop sequestered from vulnerable furry creatures that precludes me from tackling crafting this adventure at this time. However, dear artisans, in my research, I came across a small business, Nordquist Designs, that sells kits so you can build reproductions of the most popular mass-produced American dollhouses, manufactured at the end of the 19th century. Before we teleport back to the 19th century, I think an armchair history of dollhouses is in order so we can better appreciate these miniature architectural wonders in their historic context. While miniatures date back to the ancient Egyptians, the concept of houses specifically for dolls originated in Europe in the mid-16th century. The earliest dollhouse on record dates from 1558 in Bavaria, Germany. The dollhouse was commissioned by Albert V, the Duke of Bavaria, for his young daughter. It was amongst his items listed in inventory. Unfortunately, the dollhouse was destroyed in a fire. There were three main schools of dollhouses: Dutch, German, and English. Dollhouses from these schools usually contained expertly crafted furnishings and occupants that reflected the fashions and customs of the time. The Dutch call them poppenhuizen, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, due to their opulence and exorbitantly expensive materials, as well as the amazing condition we find them in today. These were probably never meant to be children's toys and were the pet projects of wealthy women. They were mostly made in unassuming cabinets that only looked like dollhouses once their doors were opened. One of the most famous is the dollhouse of Petronella Ortmann, created in the late 17th century. This is the very dollhouse that inspired the novel and miniseries, The Miniaturist. What is rare about this dollhouse is the fact that we also have a painting of it from about 1710, which shows that it was updated as time went on, perhaps to keep up with the trends, decor, and fashions of the time. So we have to remember that these historic dollhouses are not necessarily frozen in the time period in which they were built. The Puppenhaus of Germany, while a popular pastime for wealthy women, were also didactic tools used to teach girls how to run a household. While the interior was elaborate, there were no facades to the dollhouses, and they were mostly made in box-like plain structures. The Stromer family dollhouse from 1639 is an excellent example of the detail that went into these houses that were built to both teach and delight. This house even includes livestock stables. In England, early baby houses, as they were called, were commissioned by the wealthy for their children. They employed architects, cabinet makers, and craftsmen of all trades to create dollhouses and their furnishings. The design of the dollhouse often replicated in miniature the family's home and had a realistic facade with keen architectural details. Most had working staircases that led to other floors versus leading to a dead end, as was the custom with most German dollhouses. In America, the earliest known dollhouse is the Van Cortlandt dollhouse, dated 1744. It is on display at the Van Cortlandt House Museum in the Bronx, New York, a National Historic Landmark. In general, American dollhouses were square or rectangular with architectural details. In France, the earliest known dollhouse was built in 1680 by a family in Strasbourg. Unlike other countries, the French never had a market for cheap dollhouses, and they were mostly elaborate and made out of high-quality materials. Also unique to France, they never produced dolls' rooms, also known as room sets. Room sets are a miniature of just one room, such as a parlor, or a setting, such as a store, that usually included furnishings. A modern example are the beloved book nooks for our shelves and bookcases. While they existed in England and in America, they were mostly popular and preferred to dollhouses on the continent. The most famous example of a room set is the Nuremberg kitchen out of Germany, which were toy kitchens built to educate girls on how to use the many pots, pans, appliances, and utensils of German cookery. Most countries that had dollhouses also had these toy kitchens. They were very detailed and even came with little cookbooks. Miniature shops were also popular room sets. Their scale was usually larger than the standard dollhouse scale of 1 inch to the foot. Millinery shops and grocers were popular. Butchers were particularly common in England. By the mid-19th century, dollhouses were being built with all the amenities of modern living. Some had working stoves, indoor plumbing, running water, gas lights, fireplaces, and towards the end of the 19th century, electricity and working elevators. But the most important change for the dollhouse during this time was its reach. Thanks to the Industrial Revolution and advances in manufacturing, Dollhouses could now be mass-produced and thus became more affordable and accessible. Also during this time, dollhouses were seen as children's toys rather than museum pieces curated by the leisure class. In the US and the UK, most commercially made dollhouses, and most toys for that matter, were imported from the continent. Even if the dollhouse was domestically made, virtually all furnishings were imported. However, by the 1800s, thanks to advancements in technology and the desire for more domestic toys, manufacturers started to spring up in the US and the UK. This was especially true by the end of the First World War around 1918, when absolutely nothing was being imported from Europe, and almost all toys and dollhouses were made in the UK and US respectively. In 1889, England started the English Toy Company, and various manufacturers sprung up stateside, including Era Bliss Manufacturing Company of Pawtucket, Rhode Island, and Mcloughlin Brothers Manufacturers of New York City. Era Bliss Manufacturing Company was founded in 1832 and were known for their tools and specialty screws by the mid-19th century. But by 1871, their wooden toys were being advertised. Their first dollhouse was produced in 1895, and while other manufacturers used chromolithographs that were glued to wood, they were the most popular and known for their use of aged wood in manufacturing. The issue store proprietors had with wooden dollhouses and toys was the fact that over time, from sitting in inventory, the wood would start to crack and warp since it wasn't acclimated to weather or humidity beforehand, causing a lot of inventory loss. Bliss aged their wood to avoid this and became known for making quality toys and dollhouses. Bliss houses were arguably the most successful US mass-produced dollhouses of their time. They also made churches, firehouses, stores, even Santa Claus and his sleigh, and were collected by families along with the dollhouses to make their own Bliss boulevards. While this dollhouse kit reproduces the Bliss-style keyhole dollhouse, the interior of this kit reflects another huge manufacturer of dollhouses, but this one made from paper before tin, plastic, or other sheet metals were used. Mcloughlin Brothers, founded in 1828. The interior of this dollhouse is a reproduction of the rooms of their folding dollhouse from 1894. Nordquist Designs also makes reproductions of paper furniture that could be used with the folding dollhouse, so when we open the Bliss house, we can take a look at the Mcloughlin world of paper dollhouses and its furnishings. The earliest catalog I could find featuring the Bliss keyhole dollhouse is from 1901. But by this point, these houses were extremely popular, and this model could have been made for years. Not all houses produced were featured in their catalogs, and I could not find catalogs for every year, so we know that they were at least made by 1901, but I suspect the keyhole dollhouse was made before then.
Okay, dear artisans, let's take a look at the kit, what's included in the kit, what other materials are needed to complete the Bliss keyhole dollhouse. The kit retails for $195. I did buy it from their eBay store. However, they have much more of a selection on their own website, and I will leave a link in the description. I am not sponsored by them, so feel free to visit their site if you are so inclined for such a crafting misadventure. Their other kits look absolutely amazing and adorable, so I highly recommend you at least check them out. The house itself is made of plywood. There are a few pieces of the dollhouse that are solid wood, but the majority is plywood. Plywood has been around since the ancient Egyptians, but wasn't used on a mass scale until about the 1850s. While plywood existed at the time that the Bliss dollhouses were in production, I have found no evidence that plywood was used to make the houses. All evidence I have leads to the road that they used solid wood. Plywood is less likely to warp or crack due to changes in the environment, so I can see why Nordquist Designs made the choice to use this instead of 100% solid wood. The closure mechanism is simply a bent nail that gets pushed through the side of the wall into a block that is glued to the inside door of the dollhouse. On the extant examples that I've seen, it is either a latch-like mechanism or it's a hook that attaches to a nail that is hammered into the side of the house. I can see why they went with this type of closure. It is somewhat primitive in its aesthetics, but I wanted to point that out because I've never seen a bent nail in the extant examples, not to say that that didn't exist. The original dollhouse had real windows with a working front door, and also the window that's in the keyhole pediment at the top also was a quote-unquote real window. The windows were actually made of mica, which is a silicate mineral that is pressed into sheets to form this unbreakable material that resembles glass. There were also real lacy curtains in the window. As you can see, this is simply a photograph of an extant house that was reproduced with probably a high resolution camera. The door did open and close on the original, but I think for ease of production, they decided not to do this because just think about how much more complicated the house kit would have been. They're trying to make it as user-friendly as possible for the most people as possible, which is why most of the house comes already assembled together, and it's not just a box full of wooden pieces from scratch that you have to assemble. The dormer windows were always chromolithographs, so using these reproduction chromolithographs is 100% accurate. The chromolithographs are being reproduced by obviously a laser printer under cardstock. The cardstock is actually sort of a creamy yellowish color, which I think is a really great choice because it would have just been too stark if it was on white cardstock. While the kit comes with wallpaper from the folding dollhouse made by Mcloughlin Brothers from 1894, originally the house wouldn't have had anything inside. The inside was either just left with the natural wood or it was painted in a solid color, and the owner would decorate the house with whatever pieces of paper that were lying around or leftover samples or pieces of wallpaper that were completely out of scale. It does look a little strange, but this would be 100% accurate. I want the inside to reflect the Mcloughlin world of the paper doll house with the interior wallpaper as well as the paper furniture that I also have. And then the outside will be the Bliss world of the chromolithographed wood dollhouse. I think it's really charming and cute. And if I wanted to be super accurate, then I would just use some of my leftover wallpaper samples that I had from another project to wallpaper the interior of the dollhouse and call it a day. Moving on to the materials needed to assemble the house, we need a pair of scissors, a craft knife, a ruler or a T-square, paintbrushes, glue, and acrylic paints. Acrylic paint wasn't invented until the 1930s. If I wanted to be really pedantic, I would have used oil-based paints to paint the house. However, I am going to stick to the prescribed acrylic paints. Due to safety reasons, I have little kitties running around the house, and I do not trust that a simple door would be a strong enough barrier to prevent a cat from slithering in unawares. The instructions called for a gray, a goldish yellow, a seafoam green, burnt sienna, and red craft paint. They did prescribe specific brands and colors, but I went with whatever was available at my local craft store. You can paint the house whatever color you want, but most of the extant examples I've seen follow this color palette that the instructions are prescribing, so I am going to go with it. I did see some that, for example, had blue roofs instead of red roofs, but because I like the way the red roof looks and I do like the aesthetics of the color choice, I am going to go with that. To apply the paint, I am going to use a natural bristle hog brush as they would have had at the time. They were quite cheap, or they could be very expensive depending on the quality of the bristles, as is the case today. Hog bristles were also known as Russia bristles because the majority of the bristles used to manufacture these paintbrushes came from Russia. However, this changed during World War I. Now, this is a flimsy brush and probably flimsier than what they would have used on the assembly line. I originally bought these brushes to apply the glue, but since this is not a fine project, I'm not redoing a really gorgeous piece of furniture where I would want to invest in a $20 or $30 brush, I decided just use the supplies that I have, and these are perfectly adequate for this project. You would think that the unevenness of the bristles would cause a lot of streaking in the paint application, and I was concerned about this, so I did a couple of swatch tests comparing it to a synthetic brush. While the synthetic brush kind of has a sleeker look to it, there actually were no major streaks on the bristle brush application. I was very impressed with it. You can't really tell in the video. I'm trying to show it to you. The one on the left is from the bristle brush. The one on the right is from the synthetic bristle brush, but I'm very happy with the application. There is a little bit of texture to it, and I like that it adds a little bit of life to it. I definitely think I am making the right decision using this natural bristle cheapy brush, though I might have to go through a few of them to get the project done. The supply list specifically calls for Yest paste as a glue, as well as plain old white glue. Yest paste is a proprietary formulation of dextrine-based glue. Dextrine was patented in 1867 and is made from hydrolyzed starch. We can find it on gummed paper such as stamps and envelopes. It did exist during the time that the Bliss houses were produced, so in that sense it is historically accurate, although we don't know what glue was used to adhere the chromolithographs to the wood, but it is a nice touch that the glue would have existed at the time. I did some tests and the cardstock adhered spectacularly to the wood. It did not move. This stuff is the perfect choice for the job. However, I would not get any of the glue on the actual graphic. You can wash it off with warm water, but I would be afraid of damaging the cardstock, so I'm going to be super careful not to get it on the graphic. Meltonian shoe polish in the color of dusky brown is called for in the materials list as a means of aging the house. To have that antiqued, it's been sitting in an attic for, I don't know, over 100 years look, I don't think I'm going to do this, but I bought it just in case. I can always use it on my shoes. I did some research on the company, and it turns out it was established in 1893, which would have been contemporaneous with the production of this Bliss Dollhouse. It is an oil-based shoe polish, and according to their website, it's an old-fashioned formula. So I'm thinking that's to mean that it hasn't changed that much since then. So I do appreciate this little hat tip, but let's stay tuned. I will see if I end up using it, but I doubt it. Okay, enough chattering about this. It is time to get to work. So please stay tuned for part 2, where I put my smock on and together we will assemble this 1901 late Victorian era dollhouse. I look forward to seeing you presently.
Particular crafting misadventure at this point in time, Susie. However, in my research, Susie, you want to be on camera, buddy? Want to be on camera?